Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, Switzerland welcomes you with open arms. My country, its people and its authorities and government, and Geneva in particular, wishes you a very warm welcome. We welcome you to speak here and to take action to prevent the unnecessary suffering brought about by violent extremism. Welcome to our United Nations, and particular thanks to you, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, and indeed to your team for having organized this conference in partnership with Switzerland. Why are we meeting today? Or rather, for whom are we meeting? We're doing it for every child, every young person, for every woman and every man who is a victim of the terrible fragility in our world, and for everyone who might become a victim tomorrow, and also to take on board the real progress that has been made. It depends on our ability to work together to address the underlying causes of this fragility and to work consistently over the long term to prevent this and to give everyone some prospects in life. Many of you come from countries and regions that are affected by this daily fragility. Many of us have been to see firsthand what life is like in these countries and have witnessed the courage, because one needs to be courageous and have a great deal of strength to live in a place where there is such fragility, trying to make a better life for people and try not to lose hope. We are familiar with this reality, and we therefore are well aware that it is our joint responsibility to improve security everywhere. We need each other. On Tuesday last in Stockholm, at the International Dialogue on Peace Building and State Building, concrete action in favor of fragile states was on the agenda. In Geneva today, we are striving to make progress in preventing violent extremism in all our countries, in the fragile context as well as in other contexts. Next month, the World Humanitarian Summit takes place in Istanbul. The outcome of all of these gatherings and conferences needs to be the mobilization of the international community to find real joint answers to the critical and very real problems of our time, to the real difficulties facing people. I also, ladies and gentlemen, want to express our gratitude for you being here today. Your presence demonstrates your determination to combat the scourge of violent terrorist acts perpetrated against civilians, like those recently carried out in Brussels, Lahore, in Syria and Iraq, and in many other regions of the world. We condemn these atrocities in the strongest possible terms, and our thoughts and sympathies are with the victims and their families and loved ones. Terrorism continues to spread around the globe. It constitutes one of the gravest threats to international peace and security. It is a threat that is aggravated still further by the emergence of terrorist groups like Daesh, who control vast swathes of territory. They control the people who live there and the resources. As states, it is our responsibility to protect our citizens and defend their freedoms. We have to ensure that the perpetrators of these acts of violence are hunted down, brought to justice, and we must also bring help and relief to those people who are going through and enduring a humanitarian crisis. Preventing violent extremism means stepping up our efforts to promote the rule of law, human rights, and, when there is armed conflicts, international humanitarian law. In our battle against terrorism, we must make use of preventive as well as repressive measures. We also need a clear understanding of the phenomenon we are facing so that we can act on the factors that draw people in, especially young people as they're drawn to violent extremism in all countries. We need to offer young people opportunities, prospects, render them unreceptive to the temptations of terrorism. We need to offer them another choice, an alternative in the form of education, training and jobs. These young people one day need to have an opportunity to become bakers, drivers, teachers, entrepreneurs, not extremists. We need to invest further and more in what is simply a better future. The UN has a decisive role to play in preventing violent extremism. We welcome, in particular, the stated will to act, and we have seen the Secretary-General's plan of action. This plan is greatly helping to re-energize the UN's prevention agenda, and particularly Pillars 1 and 4 of the 2006 UN Global Counter-Terrorism Strategy. Preventive measures to eradicate the conditions that encourage the spread of terrorism, as well as the measures needed to guarantee that human rights and the rule of law are respected. In short, taking action to address the roots of terrorism and emphasizing values. This policy approach puts prevention at the heart of action. It is gaining in credibility and credence. Recent reviews on peacekeeping operations, the peace-building architecture and the implementation of Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security underscore the paramount importance of prevention. Then the Sustainable Development Goals go in a similar vein, in particular Goal 16, which aims to promote peaceful societies and to build effective, inclusive institutions that are accessible to all. This is the policy approach to which my country wants to intensively contribute. Preventing violent extremism is first and foremost a national challenge, and in Switzerland, this is also a cantonal and local undertaking. My country's federalist structure rests on the firm belief that a culture of dialogue, compromise, inclusive decentralized solutions and respect for minorities, as well as the separation of powers, constitute the underpinning, the real foundation for peace. In Switzerland, the principle of subsidiarity guarantees that decisions are made as closely as possible to our citizens, taking account of their needs. Local communities, ladies and gentlemen, play a key role in integrating people from different backgrounds. And they also help us to identify the kinds of behavior that may lead to violence. Towns and municipalities are closest to what is happening on the ground. Effective urban planning that prevents, in particular, the creation of ghettos is the key that will allow us to close the door on violent extremism and open the door to inclusive societies. Furthermore, at national level, Switzerland is actively fighting racism and racial discrimination and educating people about human rights. We focus on youth, for instance, through programs to prevent violence at home, at school and in public places, and through programs to teach young people about the risks of using digital media. Last year, the Swiss government approved a new counter-terrorism strategy. It has 4 areas of action: prevention, law enforcement, protection and crisis management. They are consistent with the Swiss federal constitution and comply with international law, particularly human rights, because respect for the rule of law, human rights and humanitarian principles is absolutely essential for the well-being, welfare and development of our society. This strategy aims to prevent radicalization through education, employment, training, and measures aimed at prisons, youth centers, places of worship, through dialogue with particularly vulnerable communities and by preventing the stigmatization of minorities. We also want to consolidate the links between the various stakeholders and actors and strengthen how they work together in networks. We also use our domestic experience to guide our foreign policy commitments. Countering terrorism by preventing violent extremism is a priority for our foreign policy. It forms the basis of commitments to peace and security, development and human rights. In other words, we are convinced, firstly, that human security and human rights for all are an integral part of national security, and that, secondly, preventing violent extremism is the most effective way of countering terrorism. In concrete terms, we've developed a foreign policy action plan for preventing violent extremism. Its priorities are young people, women, and one of its key instruments is here, International Geneva. Children and young adults can play a very different role in the context of violent extremism. They can form links, sadly, with terrorist groups and go as far themselves as committing terrorist acts. They can also be terrorism's victims. More importantly, they can play a decisive role in mobilizing people against violent extremism. Therefore, we need not only to protect young people against violent forms of extremism and prevent them from being recruited by terrorist groups, but we also need to empower them so they can become active players themselves in combating such extremism. The same applies to women. For instance, one project that Switzerland is supporting in a marginalized part of Tunis aims to improve young people's involvement in social and political life by bolstering their participation in local governance. My country has also launched an international initiative calling for the development of standards and best practices for juvenile justice in a counter-terrorism context. And we are working on the ground to give young people the chance to attend school, get a job, earn their living. In short, to give them alternatives to violence. Over the last 4 years, Switzerland has given 300,000 people, mostly young people, the opportunity to do vocational training and education in 20 countries, including Nepal, Burkina Faso, the Western Balkans, Myanmar, and Rwanda. We intend to intensify these activities together with the private sector, which plays a primordial role in promoting skill acquisition and creating jobs. Switzerland can also make a real contribution to these efforts thanks to this place, thanks to International Geneva. The prevention of violent extremism lies at the intersection of peace and security, development and human rights. And we need to connect, interlink these pillars of global stability. We need to do it better and bring them together. In Geneva, a great number of international organizations, research and training bodies, think tanks, civil society organizations are all working towards the same goal: to prevent and resolve conflicts, build peace, protect and promote human rights, and promote international humanitarian law as well as refugee law, all of which are essential for preventing violent extremism. These organizations and institutions have tremendous potential. It is potential at your disposal, available to you in this universal city. Switzerland has founded organizations such as the Geneva Center for Security Policy, the GCSP, as well as the Geneva Center for the Democratic Control of Armed Forces, DCAF, which have already developed expertise and earned recognition internationally in areas related to the prevention of violent extremism. Geneva also hosts the headquarters of GCERF, the Global Community Engagement and Resilience Fund. This was conceived as a public-private partnership for channeling funds from private and public donors to grassroots organizations in a bid to strengthen resilience to violent extremism at the local level. GCERF is starting to fund projects in Bangladesh, Mali and Nigeria. They will soon be joined by Kosovo, Myanmar and Kenya, and many more countries have expressed an interest. To sustain these activities and to broaden its scope, the international community needs to provide GCERF with additional funding from public and private sector sources. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, let's not forget that investing in the prevention of violent extremism costs far less than mitigating its consequences. Therefore, prevention is not only better than the cure, it is also cheaper. Let me be clear about this. We need not only the will, but the sufficient funding to carry out the UN Plan of Action to prevent violent extremism and the regional and national action plans. This funding, moreover, needs to be long-term. Preventive action is to terrorism what the marathon is to athletics. It is now up to us, in each country and within the United Nations, to keep going, to set the right priorities and maintain them over the long term. These are priorities that will create real opportunities and will give hope for future new generations. Thank you very much for your attention and fruitful work.